Hey Dragonfly Swarm, so today's video is kinda different. I'm gonna be talking about Sumeru, an upcoming region in Genshin Impact surrounding the Dendro element. I had a conversation with one of my viewers on Twitch about why there hasn't been any new in-game content in the years since Genshin's been released, and they made a good point about a few things. So let's first dive into the whole idea of in-game content. A large portion of the Genshin community has reached the endgame where we have very few if any quests to complete, and therefore all we do is log on, spend a little resin, do dailies, log off, repeat, and occasionally Spiral Abyss when that resets. But the general idea is that there's been basically an entire year where a large part of the Genshin community hasn't really had much reason to keep playing besides farming for new and upcoming characters. A lot of people have had ideas about potential endgame content, however, such as dungeons, challenging co-op raids, endless Spiral Abyss modes, etc., in which the player is heavily challenged and forced to really consider their builds and strategies. In-game content like this also promotes replayability because you can replay it with your friends or replay it with new builds that took you actual time to put together. This type of content would heavily benefit miHoYo in terms of player activity, and it would make the endgame way more enjoyable than it is right now. I mean, right now there's basically not an endgame, you just farm endlessly. Which probably isn't a bad thing for me because artifact farming is kinda just pseudo gambling without the regret of having spent money. But so why does Sumeru tie into all of this? I mean, obviously with a new region is gonna come some form of new content, I would hope. But why exactly am I betting that Sumeru will be the region that actually introduces a large amount of in-game content? Well, my first reason, and the reason my Twitch viewer brought up, is that Dendro is the only unreleased element in Genshin Impact currently. Without this final element in the game for miHoYo to see how it interacts with the rest of the game, such as reactions, team comps, synergies, resonances, and a lot of other stuff, it would be difficult for miHoYo to have released big in-game content in the last year, knowing that Dendro would eventually come out and potentially screw up the fragility of this in-game content. And I say fragility because the harder a challenge, the more fragile the balancing likely was. If miHoYo wants to work on stable, replayable in-game content that actually challenges us, they'll likely want it to remain as consistent and balanced as possible, unlike in Spiral Abyss, which resets every few weeks anyways. And now, I'm not necessarily saying this is the entire reason they chose Sumeru as our next region after Inazuma, but I will say it feels like divine timing, because currently a lot of people have reached a point where all they do is resin, dailies, and the occasional guilt gambling I would know. And many players have been talking about burnout recently, which, like I said, it's been a whole year where a growing portion of the community is experiencing this lack of content. So my assumption is that miHoYo did anticipate that this would eventually become a problem, and therefore maybe set Sumeru as an earlier region to be released so that they could finalize reactions and begin designing actual endgame content. Another reason I think Sumeru will bring about endgame content is just the general difficulty of each new region we receive. Inazuma was our first glimpse as to the fruits of our labor, so to speak, because it's a region that wasn't fully finished until presumably a while after Genshin came out, and we had begun making it the most successful gacha game in history. So what I'm saying is we essentially paid for Inazuma, and it shows because it was an amazing region that in my opinion topped a lot of the previous content in terms of quality and depth. But with that also comes a huge increase in difficulty based on new mobs, new challenges, new environments, and new mechanics. Who's to say that Sumeru won't be even more difficult than Inazuma then? I mean, it is technically later in the story than Inazuma, so I'm assuming they'll continue the pattern and once again introduce a huge difficulty increase with Sumeru's release. So with the idea that Sumeru will introduce new content for the hungry endgame players on top of releasing, presumably, the final element for Genshin characters and taking into account the huge difficulty increase that comes with each region, my general conclusion is that miHoYo will take this opportunity to release real first-time in-game content. Remember, before Genshin, miHoYo was a pretty small company, but they've grown and adapted to listening to the community, well, besides when it comes to anniversary rewards, pretty well. And from a business standpoint, they really need to consider the longevity of the game for all players, not just new and casual ones. So Sumeru would be a great time to introduce huge and engaging new in-game content that is not only challenging and refreshing, but also replayable. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. No, but seriously, if you liked this video and you want more content like it, or just general Genshin news, feel free to subscribe or join my Discord server or follow me on Twitch, because I stream almost every night at 7 PM EST. Alright, I'm gonna go cope with my pseudo gambling artifact farming so that I don't spend actual money on Genshin gambling. Wish me luck.